Hi, everybody. Miss McGee here. So we last learned about how our brains encode information and store it in our brains. We're now going to talk about how do we pull that information out when we need it. So if we need a memory, if we need something you've learned, and that's called retrieval and retention. So retrieval is that process of going in and pulling out the memory. And retention is this idea of holding on to the memories. So our learning targets for this for today are explain the different ways memory retention is measured. So, how do psychologists know how well you're retaining memory? And that's through recall, recognition, and relearning. And then we're going to talk about Ebbinghaus's forgetting curve. We're also going to talk about how external cues, our emotions, and even the order of appearance of information can serve as a retrieval cue. So, how those kind of help us remember. So, um, so you've learned this information, we've had these memories, how are we going to get them out of our brain? The first way that they measure that is how good is our recall. So what recall means, it's memory demonstrated by retrieving information learned earlier. So if you've ever taken a test that has short answer or fill in the blank, you've used recall. You've gone back into your brain to fill in that little blank. Maybe it was the word and it was a blank that you were supposed to write in a vocabulary word, and next to it is the definition. So maybe the definition was the study of scarcity and how we make choices to deal with it. And then that word you were supposed to write in that blank was economics. Okay. Um, the second way we get information out of our brains is called recognition. And this is basically memory that's demonstrated by our ability to identify items previously learned. So, again, going back to that test example, anytime you take a multiple choice test, you are using recognition. You have four possible answers laid out in front of you. And if you've studied, hopefully you can recognize which one is the correct answer. Just a little bit more to kind of differentiate between recall and recognition. As a teacher, I've been teaching for 13 years. It's 2020 in case it ever gets used again. And I live in the community of White Bear Lake. So when I go out and about, I often see students that I've had, maybe students from last year or maybe even, 10, 12, 13 years ago. So anyways, sometimes I have a hard time recalling their name. So I know I've had them, right? I have that recognition. I can recognize that I had the students. In fact, I can probably even remember where they sat in my classroom and maybe even who they sat next with, what hour of the day I had them. I've got all of these different connections that I know that student, but I just can't recall their name for whatever reason. So, but I can recognize them, right? The last way is relearning, and this is just this idea that we relearn more quickly when we relearn material again. I took economics in high school, and I'm going to talk a lot about econ because that's my other love in life. I took econ in high school, and then when I went back to college, it was much easier for me to learn. Or sorry, when I went to college, it was much easier for me to learn because I had already learned it before and I learned it faster, right? So that's relearning. All right. So kind of connected to relearning is this idea of Ebbinghaus's retention curve. This is Ebbinghaus over here on the left side. And basically each time we revisit information, it takes us less and less time to relearn. So Ebbinghaus kind of tested himself. What he did is he created like these lists of gibberish words, I guess. They all had like two consonants and a vowel. So for example, he might have had the word CAG, CAG. They weren't real words. And on day one, he had this list and he tried to learn them all. Okay. He came back on day two, and you can see over there time and minutes taken to relearn the list on day two. It took him 20 minutes to go back through all of those nonsense words and relearn them. The more repetitions he did over time, it took him less and less time to learn. So this is kind of why your teachers tell you you shouldn't cram the night before a test. You should revisit information that you've learned maybe throughout the week or 2 weeks before a test to kind of keep practicing that, because it's easier and easier for you to recall that information. So the next part, I've got the spider web because I really like this idea of our brains kind of creating a web of associations when we learn things. What are retrieval cues and how do they help us retrieve information? So a retrieval cue is basically any stimulus. So this can be an event, it can be a feeling, it can be senses, like it can be a smell, a sound, a taste, or even a place linked to a specific memory. So, for example, I have this example of visiting an old school or smelling a perfume. If you've ever gone back now as a high school student to your elementary school, you maybe remember as you walk in, you start to remember different things. Like maybe you remember something that happened by that drinking fountain, or a memory of a teacher, maybe. Um, I tend to have really strong smell based memories, I guess. I always have. A couple of years ago, I bought these makeup remover wipes that I was going to bring on vacation just so I didn't have to bring, a million different things. They're super convenient. And as I was wiping my makeup off my face, the smell was really overwhelming and it brought me back to when I studied abroad in Europe. I had brought those with. So again, I didn't have to cart around a bunch of liquids. And that smell was such a strong reminder. It like took me back to a bathroom in Germany. Same thing with perfumes. Like every now and then I'll walk past like an older lady and they're wearing the same perfume as my grandma, and all of these feelings of grandma rush back, right? So it's kind of cool. But these can be places, even an event or a way that you feel. The next one, retrieval cue, is something called priming. And this usually happens unconsciously, meaning you're not like actively thinking about it, but it's an association that you have um, with different things. So if I said like cat, you might have different responses, but the first thing I think of when I say cat is mouse. Okay. So let's try an example of this really quick. Okay. So I want you just to answer me, even though I can't hear you, out loud to yourself. So the first question is, what color is snow? What color are the clouds? And what do cows drink? Okay. For what color is snow? I'm sure you said white. For clouds, the color of the clouds is white. But what did you say for what cows drink? Did you say milk? If so, this is an example of priming. Do cows drink milk? No, right? But why do you think that you said what color is snow? White. What color are the clouds? You said white. What do cows drink? Milk. Okay, well, milk's white, and you heard drink, and milk is white. So maybe that was kind of the priming example that you had. It's kind of cool. Go test this on your friends and family. It's quite hilarious. I did it to my husband and my two 6-year-old twins, and they all said milk at the end. So that's okay. So our next type of retrieval cues is context dependent memory. So there's a couple different types, which I'll talk about in a minute. But for example, um, when I was first dating my husband in high school, we were, I think, probably like, I don't know, 16 or 17 at the time. I went to the grocery store with my mom and we bumped in to two people who I knew that I had recognized. I knew that they were related to my husband, or well, he was my husband at the time, but I knew they were related to Mike. I could not remember their names, and it was super embarrassing. It was his aunt and uncle, Doug and Terry, which I remembered later, but because they were out of context, I had only seen his family members at like family events. I had a really hard time recalling what their name was, and it was super embarrassing. So sometimes context, like what's surrounding us, certain situations, help us remember better than others. And they often say that you'll perform better on a test if you take the test where you learn the material. Anyways, there's also state dependent memories and mood congruent memories. So these are two different things that help us remember. So state dependent memory is basically what we learn in one state or mood may be more easily recalled in that same mood. Okay. And I'm realizing this in another. All right, on that same state. So for example, drug and alcohol use. To be clear, we tend not to remember a ton with drug and alcohol use as it is. But if you experience something or learn something while you were high or drunk, you'd be more likely to remember that in the same state. Maybe more important and specific to you is mood congruent memory. So it's basically our ability or tendency to recall experiences that are consistent with how you're feeling now. So if I'm feeling happy and I think back to something that happened to me in school, I'm more likely to remember that event as better than it was. If I'm angry, like if I'm feeling angry about something, I'm more likely to remember that as as a really bad event. So I've got this little doggo over here, and if you've ever heard the phrase like through viewing the world through rose-colored glasses, it's that same idea. If you're happy, you're more likely to remember events as happy. Finally, there's a serial position effect, which is basically this idea that you will remember things like, say, if you're talking about like a list of numbers, you're more likely to remember those at the beginning and those at the end. So the primacy effect is basically this idea that you're going to remember the items that were listed first, and the recency effect is the ones that come at the end of the list. So, for example, when I learned the digits of pi, like I knew them all at one point, not all of them, but I knew a lot of them, maybe 20 digits at some point. But I have since forgotten them and only remember 3.14. So there's an example of the primacy effect. We're going to do something with presidents in class with this as well. So I won't say too much more about that, but please refer to your student notebook for some questions surrounding the material learned today.